Ladies and gentlemen, we must begin by looking into the rearview mirror of history to understand that what is unfolding in Venezuela today is neither a novel phenomenon nor an isolated incident, but rather a script that has been rehearsed time and again in the annals of foreign intervention and regime change. When I look at the capture of Nicolás Maduro and the simultaneous survival of his repressive apparatus, I am reminded of the hard-learned lessons from Panama or Iraq, where we erroneously believed that severing the head of a dictatorship would automatically cause the body to collapse or miraculously transmute into a functioning democracy. Historical reality has proven the exact opposite because authoritarian regimes do not rest solely on the shoulders of one individual but are sustained by a labyrinthine root system of entrenched interests and existential fear. The celebration in Washington regarding this tactical victory is premature and lacks the prudent caution required of long-term strategic thinking, for the power vacuum created immediately after a dictator's removal is often the most perilous phase of transition. What we are witnessing on the ground is not the dawn of liberty, but the violent convulsions of a wounded beast that retains its claws and the capacity to inflict lethal damage upon the innocent. The cold, hard truth that we must confront immediately is that the removal of Nicolás Maduro from the presidential palace does not equate to a loosening of the police state's grip. On the contrary, the repression has intensified with a desperate ferocity. Intelligence reports and ground-level sources paint a grim picture in which the Venezuelan security forces have not disintegrated but are instead on an aggressive manhunt for anyone daring to celebrate the former leader's downfall. These forces are boarding public buses, interrogating passengers at checkpoints, and physically searching personal phones to scour private messages on WhatsApp for keywords like invasion or Trump, looking for any evidence of approval regarding the United States' actions. This is the behavior of a panicked yet ruthless apparatus that understands its survival depends entirely on extinguishing any spark of rebellion before it can catch fire. We must not labor under the illusion that Venezuelans are breathing the air of freedom when, in reality, they are navigating a landscape of fear that is perhaps more suffocating now than it was under the previous status quo. When we drill down into the current power structure, we encounter a deep irony and a glaring contradiction in American policy, as we appear to be placing our bets on the very individuals who served as the right hand of the old regime. The interim leader, Delcy Rodriguez, is not a democratic reformer or a fresh face, but Maduro's former vice president and an integral cog in the machinery that drove the country into ruin. Her behavior publicly condemning the United States in speeches while simultaneously cutting deals in the back room reveals the brutally transactional nature of international politics. We are watching a duplicitous theater where the interim government chants anti-imperialist slogans to placate its domestic base, while quietly agreeing to ship 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the very nation they label as the enemy. This is not a transition to democracy. It is the restructuring of an authoritarian regime into a form that is palatable to the West for economic reasons, yet whose internal character remains fundamentally unchanged. From the vantage point of a longtime intelligence professional, I see enormous risks in the current Washington administration's prioritization of short-term economic gains over core democratic values. White House officials have expressed confidence that Ms. Rodriguez will follow their orders, evidenced by the rapidity of the oil agreement, yet this confidence appears dangerously misplaced when it comes to human rights. When pressed by reporters on the fate of political prisoners or the return of exiles, the president's response was that they haven't gotten to that yet and that the priority is to fix up the oil. This is a hazardous mindset because it sends a signal to autocrats worldwide that the United States is willing to turn a blind eye to repression so long as energy interests are secured, By pouring money into this government's coffers through oil contracts without first securing structural reforms, we are inadvertently financing the very security apparatus that continues to hold the Venezuelan people hostage. Consider the resurgence of paramilitary forces and irregular armed groups known as colectivos now flooding the streets of Caracas as a testament to the volatility of the current order. A 90-day state of emergency has essentially been declared, granting security forces broad, unchecked powers to search and capture anyone deemed a supporter of the U.S. attack, bypassing all standard judicial procedures. The presence of masked men patrolling with rifles is not a measure of national security, but a tactic of terror designed to ensure that the streets remain empty of protest. The fact that citizens are forced to wipe their phones and hide their true sentiments even within the privacy of their own homes demonstrates that the state's intrusion has reached totalitarian levels. The silence that hangs over Venezuela today is not the silence of stability or consensus. It is the silence imposed by the barrel of a gun pressed against the temple of a nation. We also cannot ignore the complex geopolitical chess match occurring behind the curtain as the United States attempts to surgically remove the influence of strategic adversaries from our hemisphere. In private negotiations, Washington has pressured Ms. Rodriguez's government to expel spies and military personnel from China, Russia, Iran, and Cuba. While this aligns with a realist doctrine of protecting American security interests, we must question the practical capacity of this interim government to execute such a pivot. Is a fragile administration, deeply dependent on these external actors for years, truly strong enough to sever ties with the powers that prop them up, or will they merely play a double game to maximize their leverage? Purging foreign influence is a necessary objective. But if it is not accompanied by the construction of robust democratic institutions, Venezuela will remain nothing more than a pawn on the board of great power competition, vulnerable to the next bidder. Another harrowing reality we must face is the continued operation of torture centers, such as the notorious El Helicoide prison in the middle of Caracas, which shows no signs of closing despite rhetoric to the contrary. The president referred to this facility as a torture chamber that is being closed up, yet as of Wednesday, it appeared to be fully operational, continuing to house those who dissent. The anecdote of produce vendor in Zulia arrested and extorted by police simply for shouting in celebration, or the detention of journalists at the very swearing in of the interim president, serves as visceral proof that the regime's brutality has not abated. When police officers extort $1,000 from a family or accept bags of vegetables as a bribe for freedom, it indicates a state that has failed morally and functionally. Corruption and repression are the lifeblood of this system, and merely changing the figurehead at the top does not filter out the toxins running through its veins. The pragmatic solution to this stalemate does not lie in flowery promises or short-sighted economic calculations, but in applying genuine structural pressure on the security apparatus itself. The United States must understand that satisfying a temporary thirst for oil cannot come at the expense of regional stability and the credibility of the values we claim to uphold. If we continue to support the interim government without attaching strict preconditions regarding human rights and judicial reform, we are essentially incubating a new monster. There must be a clear roadmap that forces the Rodriguez administration to dismantle illegal armed groups like the colectivos and open the prisons to international monitors while ensuring the safe return of the opposition. Without these concrete steps, our diplomatic and military maneuvers will amount to nothing more than opportunism, and history will judge us as accomplices to tyranny rather than agents of liberation. To conclude, I must emphasize that the burden of responsibility here weighs not only on policymakers in Washington, but impacts the very lives of millions of innocent Venezuelans. The fleeting euphoria of capturing a dictator cannot mask the anguish of families torn apart or the physical suffering of those languishing in dungeons. We must not allow realism to become an excuse for apathy or complicity with evil. Foreign policy is not merely about barrels of oil or power projection. It is about fostering a world order where human beings can live without the constant dread of a midnight knock on the door by secret police. If we fail to push for substantive, systemic change in Venezuela now, the cost will not be measured in dollars, but in the blood and tears of yet another generation lost to authoritarianism